Hey there, gunfighters. Did an episode, if this is the first one you're seeing, you stumbled across it somewhere. But I did an episode, actually I recorded first the Marlin Model 60, because it came up in the Patreon chat. Then I recorded the 1022, although they'll probably come out in reverse order. And then this one, on the Marlin Model 60 versus the Ruger 1022. Why? Because they're probably the two most popular .22 rifles in history, made by humans, period. Right? So and they're both semi-automatic, shoulder-fired, .22 rifles. Why would we not compare and contrast them? And maybe where some shine and where some don't. So you might want to go back and give those other two a listen. Also, I plan on combining all three and giving them to patrons first, so they don't have to listen to one, wait for another, and then wait for another. They get them all in one big episode, commercial free. And that's just some of the small things. We talk about stuff like this all the time in our insider group. So if you want to be part of that insider group, become a patron. With that, in one corner, wearing red trunks, touting a rotary box-fed magazine. And in your other corner, wearing blue trunks, the Marlin Model 60 with its micro groove rifling, ready to duke it out. But seriously, these are like the two, right? An elephant in the room. Spoiler alert, if you don't know, the Marlin Model 60 is not currently being made at the time of this recording. Now, Marlin did get bought by Ruger, which is an interesting quandary because Ruger right now has almost unarguably the best 1022 rifle on the market. Will it bring back its like all-time rival? I don't know. It's kind of a weird, like, maybe they should, but maybe it's a bad business move. Like, I don't know. But right now it's not being made. But there were so many made for so long. Millions and millions and millions. When they were both being made, Marlin said that they were the number one selling .22 rifle of all time. I'm not sure about that, but I've heard it more than one place. But that's not a witness. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, let a matter be established. I haven't looked back into their tax records or anything, right? But either way, these were the big two for decades and decades and decades. We had the Marlin Model 60 back from 1960. That's why it's called the Marlin Model 60. And the Ruger 1022 from 1964. Right, so just decades and decades of prolific manufacture of these two rifles. Why we're talking about them today. Okay, so they're both .22 rifles. They're both available, or were both available and pretty prolific in similar models. Both had a stainless option, wood stock option. Some of the big differences, though. Why are we even having this debate? They're not clones. Here are some big differences. Probably the biggest one, how do you feed the beast? One is a box magazine fed. One is a tube magazine feed. Both have advantages and disadvantages. We're going to talk about that later. But one is a tube-fed magazine. One is a box-fed magazine. The Ruger has more traditional rifling, and the Marlin has micro-groove rifling, both of which have their pros and cons. The Ruger 1022, I don't know if it originally did, but all the models I've ever seen are drilled and tapped for scope. The Marlin has the more antiquated, and I see no pros to this design, really. I guess you could put a much smaller scope on it if you just wanted a bare minimum for scope. But pretty much all cons is that unless they ever made any special models, it had that smaller old, and I think it's a 3/8 just dovetail with no linear slots in it to hold the scope in place. It's not as good a mounting system, in my opinion, and probably the vast majority of people's opinion, as the Ruger 1022, which can take a standard, what has now become standard. To be fair to Marlin, in the 1960s, it wasn't a standard. When the Marlin Model 60 came out, that version was the standard. But the more common modern Weaver or Picatinny rail for the Ruger 1022, or you can mount directly, and there are a lot of really good options for direct scope mounts. That's a big difference. Also, honestly, I think that for the factory options that I've seen, and there are a couple of different iterations of factory sights, the Marlin Model 60, I think, had better sights. It had, I think, a hooded front sight, at least the ones that I've seen, which I like better because I beat stuff up pretty good. I break stuff all the time. I go through optics a lot of times like a little kid goes through shoes. And I've broken a gun or two. So I like the hooded front sight. And I think all around, they're better sights on the Marlin. Those are some of the major differences. Okay, so I'm just going to come out and say it. I think carte blanche, you give me no other caveats. What's the better rifle? I'm going to pause to build suspense, right? That's what a good orator would do. Also, maybe say, hey, you like this content? Be a patron. You would have already had it. You wouldn't have to wait because you'd have heard it a long time ago, right? So what is the best of these two? It's the Ruger 1022. It's the best. If you just give me no other caveats, carte blanche, and Toto, pick one. You could only ever have one. Well, I made that choice a long time ago, well over 20 years ago. The Ruger 1022. It's a better all-around rifle. I'm just going to go out and say it. It's a better all-around rifle. Not best for everything. We'll get into that. But I'm not going to bury the lead all the way in the back and wait till the very end of the episode. I think if you give no caveats, the 1022 is better. Let's talk about, and I think I mentioned in the Marlin Model 60 episode, who knows how long after, unless you're a patron and you get it all at once, how long after you'll listen to this versus the Marlin Model 60, or you may not listen to it at all. For, I think, what it was originally designed for, the Marlin Model 60 is probably the most superb small game hunting afield of the two rifles, or of pretty much any rifle for a 22 long rifle. And here's why. I think the standard capacity is 18 rounds. If you're hunting squirrels, rabbits, where it's legal, grouse, things like that, prairie dogs, right? We're not talking about a tactical scenario, at least not tactical in the way that you would normally think about tactical with your multicam and your Picatinny rail on your M-lock handguard, right? We're just talking field hunting, which is something I really love to do. I was doing it today. I'm blessed to be able to put meat on. I didn't get anything today, but mostly trying to train a dog. But anyway, trying to put meat on the table in the field, small game hunting. You got 18 rounds. You shoot a couple rounds, you can pull out the tube. And if you're not familiar with this style, it has a push in and turn, or push down and twist and then pull out. And then you drop rounds in. You can load the entire thing. You can shoot a few and load a few. So generally, I'd be hard pressed to think of a situation in the field where you just were shooting 18 rounds of well-aimed fire at game and you didn't get a chance to reload, right? Normally you shoot one or two, hopefully, and you got your animal and you go get it and then you reload. Maybe it's a great hunt and you see 2 or 3 squirrels, but even so, you're probably not using 18 rounds unless you're a really bad shot, and in which case, probably a mag change is not what you need. Probably what you need is better fundamentals. Also, you got the added benefit. It makes the weapon pretty sleek. You get that under barrel design, so it really doesn't add to the profile of the gun in any measurable way. Also, you can't lose the magazine if you've ever lost a magazine afield. I suppose you could lose the inner insert to the tube, although I'm not aware of that ever happening because it's so long. I got to imagine you would really notice it starting to come out before you lost it. I've never heard of that happening. You could probably leave it at home or something if you cleaned it and didn't fully assemble it. But you get the idea. It's a lot harder to lose. It's a reason a lot of hunters really like, for like a center fire or medium and large game, they like that internal magazine in their rifle instead of a detachable box magazine for a lot of applications because you can't lose it. That hit the floor plate design. But anyway, getting off topic. For field use, that the fact that it doesn't have detachable box magazines, you might really see as a plus. Also, and I don't have empirical data on this, but I got to imagine if you bought, back when they were still being made, and you bought 10 brand new of both, I would think that if I were a betting man, I would think that the Marlin Model 60 was a more accurate rifle. It can really make a difference if you're trying to shoot a squirrel in the head at an extended distance. that micro groove rifling is kind of legendary. I think some of that's a little bit of people just love Marlin and they're brand loyal, but some of that I think is real. That micro groove rifling, they had a reputation for being very accurate. So you got that going. You got the micro groove rifling going. And I mentioned those better sights if you're just hunting with iron sights, which a lot of time for small game hunting is a good thing. Many of the advantages of the Ruger 1022 don't come into play for small game hunting. So for small game afield, I think the Marlin Model 60 is as good as anything else, and perhaps maybe better for just field use than the Ruger 1022. I don't think it's as good all around, and I certainly don't think it's as good for survival applications. Calm down if you love the Marlin Model 60 and hear me out. Okay, here's the thing, and this is common. I don't care how reliable your 22 rifle is, 22 long rifle ammo is not always the most reliable. Can we agree on that? A double feed is a real possibility. If I get a double feed in a Ruger 1022, can pretty much have a similar manual of arms as what I would do with an AK-47, actually really similar to an AK-47, or an AR-15, right? I remove the source of the ammunition, meaning a box magazine, and I work the charging handle until those rounds fall out. Unless I have a broken extractor or something, that will clear that double feed. Not a fast process, but it's way faster than if you look at a Marlin Model 60, don't have a detachable magazine. So you get a double feed, and you may have to have some kind of other tool because it's still going to be trying to shove both those rounds in there, and you can't remove the source of the ammunition unless you were to disassemble the magazine tube and dump all the rounds out on the ground. You see an issue there. Dump them in your hand, put them in your pocket, and then you still got to pull the charging handle back and try and clear the rounds. You don't have this big open area in the bottom. Like when you take that magazine out of a Ruger 1022 or an AK-47 or an AR-15, you have this big open area in which those rounds, which are probably damaged, can just fall out. And you can put the source of ammunition back in. If it's any kind of hard times use survival scenario and I get a double feed, which again, I mean, this is probably more common in rimfire ammo than centerfire ammo just because of the nature of the ammunition and the nature of the dimensions of the round. Most centerfire combat rounds are tapered for a reason. The 22 long rifle is not, and they can bend and they can double feed, I think even more commonly than centerfire. So I don't want to have to break out a tool if I'm getting shot at and try and fix a double feed in my Marlin Model 60. So if it's for any kind of survival, that reason alone right there would way put the 1022 in the front of the pack. Another reason, and I think I'm not the biggest fan of you got to have the most capacity all the time. That's not me. If you've listened for any length of time, you know that. 18 is probably more than enough if it's reliable. But if you do run out of ammo, if you just want to top off, it's faster with a box fed. It's faster even if you're using factory 10s, right? You might have 18 on tap to start with the Marlin and 10 with the Ruger, but once you get to that 10, you can just do a mag swap. Or if you're mindful before you get there, you can do a mag swap, even on the run or whatever. I'd like to meet the guy that can be running and reload the tube-fed magazine properly with like loose rounds out of his pocket, right? But you could be on the run, literally on the move, Oscar Mike, and switch out a mag in a 1022. Also, you have the ability for higher capacity magazines. Now, I like the factory 10s. I like the sleek, svelte fact that they don't stick out for most things. But you do have the option. They make even higher, but even Ruger makes factory 25 round mags. So you got that going for you. Also, if you want to mount any kind of serious modern optic, your options and the rock solidness, I guess for lack of a better term, of the mounting system is much better on the Ruger 1022 than on the Marlin Model 60. And unless you're going to keep it bone stock, there's way more aftermarket support. Not that there's none, but there's way more aftermarket support, especially now that the Marlin is not being made. It's a more modular design to begin with, and it's still being made, so the aftermarket support is much, much better for the 1022. Also, I know it's a little bit out of order, but I forgot to mention, I can't remember the last time I pulled the trigger on a Marlin Model 60, but I would think that the trigger is better on the Marlin Model 60, aiding to its accuracy as far as the shooting of it with the shooter and the rifle as a combination goes. I can't imagine anything being worse on a 22 than a Ruger factory trigger. Anyway, that said, for the all-around, for the ability to clear malfunctions, which is a big one, the ability to switch magazines, top off ammunition, reload on the go, the much better ability to mount modern optics, and the aftermarket support, I think all around, and it's not like it's a way worse gun for field hunting of small game. It's a great gun for that. But for all around, I think the clear winner is the Ruger 1022. Anyway, those are my thoughts on comparing the Marlin Model 60 to the Ruger 1022. Love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you think the Marlin Model 60 is the better of the two options. Oh, also postscript, the Ruger 1022 Takedown. You could also argue the Marlin Papoose, but I think the Marlin Papoose is built on a different model. It is not a tube-fed magazine, but they did make a similar Takedown. Although I like the Marlin Papoose, I don't think it's as good as Ruger 1022 Takedown. But without getting too far off the rails, the Ruger does give you a really good factory option for a Takedown model. Anyway, with that, let's start wrapping up this episode. Normally, I throw out a tactical tip, but I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I'm struggling to think of one right now. But what I can think of are maybe some other really cool models you may want to consider if you're not intrigued by either one of these. And now, if you're a baby boomer or older, you probably are like, yeah, I know about these. But if you're a millennial or younger, you may not know about these. There was another big seller for quite a while, the Remington 66, Nylon 66. It was kind of, I think, designed to be like a dirt cheap option that actually ended up being a really good option, a really good semi-automatic 22 rifle. And although it was designed to be cheap, it kind of has a pretty cool look to it. It kind of looks, I don't know, budget chic, if I'm making up a term. But it's a really cool rifle, and it has a reputation for being really dependable. So you may look that one up. If you come across one, just at a gun show, maybe this ding will go off in the back of your mind and be like, oh yeah, it's a good gun. As long as it's not broken or something, because it might be hard to get some aftermarket support for that. But also another really good option. Also a really cool option. For a time, Marlin made, they're kind of known for their lever actions, their Marlin 336s and things like that. They made a Takedown 22 long rifle lever action. Just a really, really cool gun. You're looking for like a cool gun to get, like to pass down to children or grandchildren, and you get a chance at one of those. Those are just exquisite. I don't know if they've ever made them in stainless steel. I've never seen one in stainless steel, but that would be, for me, even cooler. Although if you're going for like the heirloom quality thing, you may want to go for the blued steel and walnut if you're going for the classic look. Because obviously stainless steel does not look as classic because it wasn't around for as long in firearms. But those are some other really cool options you may want to look at and consider. Anyway, with that, what I do have on hand is, and what I can think of as a good tactical verse to close us out on. This is from Psalm 139, not in its entirety, but a big chunk of it. You have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts. You conceived me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. And I had to stop there and really restrain myself from not breaking it into chunks because there's so much to unpack in just that short section. Are you ever just humbled by the magnitude and how big the Bible is and how much of it there is and how rich just one verse is? There's a lot in that verse, but here's what I want to unpack here. Jesus says the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second like it is this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You can't give what you do not have. You cannot give what you don't have. Love your neighbor as yourself. You are called to love self, and that may seem like a bad thing or a strange thing, but how can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself? You are made in the image of God. Going back to Genesis. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. God made man in His own image. It doesn't say that about anything else in creation. You are made in the image of God. Back to the last part of that psalm. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. You and I are one of those works. And this shouldn't be a prideful thing because you didn't make you. I didn't make me, and I didn't make you. God made us, but He made us wonderful. God doesn't make junk. And you should never ever worship yourself. You can make yourself an idol. You can make many things an idol. But you should love you because you're told to, because God made you. And God loves you. How can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself? You love God first, right? That's the second. The first commandment is to love God. Love God first. And part of that is just being in awe of His wonderful creation. You ever just look at a sunset or the mountains or the ocean and that's just a small part what you can see. You can only ever see at one time a small fraction of God's creation. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows us His handiwork. We can only comprehend a small portion of that creation. But you and I are part of that creation and unique in that we are made in the image of God. He made you and He made me. We didn't deserve it. That is marvelous and beautiful, and we are part of that. And we have God to thank for that. There's a lot just in that one verse. That's only part of it. And just scratching the surface of it. How big that we could comprehend the height and the depth and the width and the love of God. That's our life's work, right? To be in love with God, to be on fire for God, to make that the main focus, to make God the main focus of our life. Loving God, loving neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Fearfully and wonderfully made, a marvelous work from God's, made in His image. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.